Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast, where Chief Technology Officers dig into the challenges and opportunities that leaders face every day at the intersection of business and innovation. I'm your host, Hendrich, CTO at Forte Group. In our second episode, I sit down with Jo Wickremasinghe, Chief Product and Technology Officer at BPP, a leading edtech company based in the UK. Jo shares her journey from aerospace engineering to leading high-performing technology organizations. Here's the conversation. Why don't you tell us just a bit about, who you are and how you got to be here in front of us?
So I'm Jo Wickremasinghe, and you can tell by the accent that I am not British. I am British, but I'm Australian, born and raised, and I've been in England for more than 25 years, so about equal amount of my life in both parts of the world, which is great. I started life as an aerospace engineer. That's actually how I moved to the UK. I worked for Airbus and came over here to build airplanes and worked over in Bristol, where we have a big factory. But this was the late 90s, and aerospace was not what I thought it would be when I studied it in university. So it's very, very slow moving, and it takes many years to bring a new aircraft into production. So at that time, the late 90s, .com boom, if that rings a bell to anyone, to me, it was very exciting to be graduated from university and studying at that time and working. I was an early adopter of technology, loved computers, didn't really play games, but just loved using them to make my life better. I could see the endless possibilities of productivity gains from technology. So I knew that was something I wanted to get involved in. And so I made the leap around 2000, which is interesting because the market kind of fell out, but I managed to get a job into Microsoft at that time, and that's really when I started to work for a pure play tech company, and that was amazing. I was there for 7 years, and I started off in the technical side in operations. So we used to run all of the web services for MSN, which used to be really big back in the day.
Yep, I remember.
Yeah, so I was a project manager. I took my project management skills from aerospace engineering into Microsoft and worked in the website operations team, running all of the projects for there to launch new websites. One of our biggest events was the launch of a Harry Potter movie, and we used to run promotions and campaigns on the website. There were massive, huge amount of traffic. So I got to understand that the back end of web technologies back then. I was around, getting involved when Facebook first launched. I remember some uni students who were interns with us started to use it in the office, and I was like, how do I get onto that? And we had to get invites, and it was incredible. So that period of the early noughties was just an amazing time to be involved in tech. But while I was doing that, I sort of decided that just project managing the websites and the operational side was not really the most exciting. I wanted to be involved in deciding what features people were using, what problems we were solving, and that led me into the product management side of technology. And then I just really carried on from there. I did an MBA whilst I was working because I wanted to understand some of the business side of it's not just about building cool products, but they need to make money. And that's sort of how it went from the early noughties all the way through to today. I've stayed mostly in the UK. I've worked a little bit in the US, but mainly on secondments. And I've been really lucky to work for some amazing British tech companies and brands that maybe aren't tech companies, but really have technology at the center and forefront, like the BBC. Huge audiences and really innovative in the UK. But I've worked in multiple sectors. I've worked in media, in health tech, and now I'm in ed tech. I've worked in the property and marketplace spaces. So for me, it's never about one particular sector. It's always about where are the really interesting problems to solve and how can we use technology to solve it. So I've loved it. I can't believe I am where I am in my stage of my career, because I just feel there's so much more to do. And I'm really quite jealous of the people coming into the sector now, because the opportunities are endless.
Yeah, absolutely. so much of what you said really resonates, and there's so many things to pick up on there. That one is I've often found, whether I'm hiring people or joining teams or speaking to people like you, that it seems like a lot of people in our generation, our cohort, so grew up kind of with tech in the 90s, and then saw really the explosion of so many interesting things during the 2000s, just as far as evolution of SaaS platforms, different frameworks, different ways of developing products. But we often come through this path that wasn't really planned, and it just kind of found a lot of interesting opportunities, that don't always map to a university background. And this was actually going to be one of my last questions, but and we're going to get into kind of the CPTO role too. That's a major theme that I want to explore with you. But lots of opportunities. I have, children that the oldest is looking at college. It's also kind of frightening too, right? Because how does someone decide where to go? How does someone choose that path or try to map out their destiny? On the one hand, there's so many opportunities, but on the other hand, you want to have some kind of predictability. What advice do you give people, if you're mentoring someone who's, entering their career?
Well, I look at my team today, but there are very few people I know who are still, who may be 10 years out of university, who are still doing what they studied at university. Maybe if you're a doctor and you studied medicine, that tends to build. But typically in a technology role, there aren't many people who have gone to university to study a technology course, unless it's computer science. And those guys are doing amazing stuff probably all in the AI world now. But there are so many other facets of what we do to build digital products and services, and people can come from anywhere. And what I say, I have a 14-year-old who's making GCSE decisions now. And I kind of said it to him, in a way, it doesn't really matter. I mean, he's being forced to do maths and STEM because his father's a physicist and I'm an engineer, so he has to. And I believe that if you have an analytical and mathematical mind, you can pretty much do anything from a technology perspective, certainly. But he's also very creative and very artistic, and so he might end up doing something in a creative space. Who knows? I think it's really important to do things that are interesting, that expand your mind and challenge you. And the most important thing is that culture of learning, and it's not really just about absorbing sort of kind of text, but it's actually about how do you solve problems with knowledge, and those skills. I think in a wide variety of courses you get those skills, but it's much less around like you're an expert in economics, and actually you understand how economics can help you understand people trends or natural disasters or whatever it might be. There'll be applications in all sorts of worlds for behavioral economics in technology and in digital. So I think I know it's really easy to say to a young person who's quite stressed about deciding what they should do, and are they falling into a path that might not be right for them. And I did feel like that when I started working in aerospace engineering and thinking, oh my gosh, I spent 4 years doing this engineering degree, what a waste. But actually, everything I know now about the T part of my job, technology, all comes from, I wrote software for my engineering degree. I understand how software works. That contributes to my ability to do the CTO part of my job. All of the work that I do in finance comes from my mathematics background and, modeling. And so there will always be things that anyone learns. Maybe doing French might be a harder thing to apply in technology, but there will be things that you can take from anything that you study. So I don't think it's really that important, but I really understand where young people, the challenges they face. The reality is that the jobs they think that they're going to do just won't be those jobs. They'll be completely different. And so I say go with it.
No, a couple of things there that I really I wanted to highlight. So one is, I imagine that, the way, so heavily indexing on the ability to grow and learn, over being an expert, which only comes through kind of, feeling your way through things, solving practical problems, applying tools that you have, mental maps, allows you to kind of jump from domain to domain. That could be really reassuring for people entering the job market because, it sounds like if you're going to hire people, you're probably going to hire people that are more in that category, or at least show those kinds of capabilities and curiosities than kind of going through the checklist. Do you know X, Y, Z? Does that inform how you build your organization as well?
I definitely see red flags when people regurgitate what feels like a textbook of maybe product management, for example. So they know the frameworks and they're very much, from there's a number of amazing speakers and writers in our space, but people will quote them and talk about their frameworks, not really about how they've solved problems. And so that for me is a red flag. Those are not people that I would hire. I definitely look for, and I know this, nobody taught me how to do product. Nobody. I figured it out. There wasn't really a thing back then. There were people in Microsoft in the US doing it, but we didn't have a Marty Kagan back then. We didn't, we were all learning from each other and figuring it out how we went along. And it's kind of common sense, and it's very much aligned to product, the sort of traditional product management. When you think about, kind of FMCG and physical products, there's a lot of similarities, but we were applying it in a digital world. But you had to kind of figure it out as you go. And so it was the people who could really think for themselves, think logically, think, how do I apply a marketing strategy to a digital product? How do I understand my end user, my customer, when they're, an anonymous person on a screen? And so I look for that today. I haven't hired someone at the graduate level for a long time. I have been hiring people with experience, but even then, 5 years experience can look very different. And what I look for is, what's the hardest problem you've come across? What happened? What was the thing that went wrong, and how did you deal with it? And then an understanding and hearing their thought process. And, for me, it's a cliche, but it's not the things that are the most successful that are the most valuable in terms of your learning and development. It's the things when they go wrong, and how do you react to that and deal with it. And even if you can't rectify it, there will be something in there that you will take away. And I've definitely got experience of that in my career that is maybe better the next time around. And so those are the sorts of stories and evidence I want to hear when I'm interviewing people. And absolutely the same on the technical side with engineers. It's great if you've built great software and you know all the frameworks and languages you need to, but actually, when has it gone wrong? When, have you had a security incident? Have you had an outage? Like how have you rectified that? When has there been, something that you've had to rally around as a team and solve that problem? That's the really interesting stuff that I find useful when kind of having to determine between candidate A and candidate B.
So when you hear this metaphor, you must be able to relate directly when someone says, okay, we have to migrate to a new platform, and you say, well, that's kind of like keeping an airplane in the air and changing the wings. So you know that. You studied airplanes.
I use that all the time to describe to many stakeholders what we're trying to do every day. Exactly.
Coming up next, we explore the evolution of the CPTO role, what it means to lead product and technology in investor-backed companies, and the challenges of balancing priorities. One thing that I want to explore is it makes total sense talking this through. Why would there be a role that combines product and technology? Now it makes sense. If you go back 10 years, it may not have, and a lot of organizations, I think, kept them in different silos. So as CTOs evolved from, basically keeping the servers up and running to being correlated with revenue generation, then you start to unite those two worlds. In your organization, has that always been a role? Is that a role that was created maybe around a need? Like, how did that evolve, and how did, probably most importantly, how does the board view that? Do they understand it and grasp it? It's because it is I think it's a major shift.
Yes, it's still not very common, but I had seen it in a couple of my previous roles, and to me it made complete sense. But this particular role, I created it. So I was approached by a headhunter for a chief digital officer, and said, that's not me. And then she said, well, just have a look at I think you should have a look at the job description first. And I looked at the job description, and she talked me through the investors and the company. And reading the job description, I could understand that it really was a CTO and a digital transformation leader. Like, they wanted someone to come in and really own all of the technology, but also take it from what was a massive set of legacy disparate systems into an ecosystem to drive growth, and also to massively kind of introduce efficiencies in the organization. And so for me, that was the CPTO. It was CPTO on steroids, because it had to cover everything. And I've worked with CPTOs very much in the digital only space, but we are, this role covers all aspects. So I said, well, it's really interesting, and here's all the things I think this job needs, but I'm only doing it if it's at CPTO, because that's what will look good on my CV, because that's the trajectory I've had. That's what makes sense to me, and that's what will help me hire the right people I need to hire, because there'll be people who've worked with CPTOs before. And they said, sure. How was that? They were like, as long as you take the job, you can call it whatever you want.
I think that's a genius approach. It kind of turns all the tables, right? Some people, would think, a headhunter approaches you and you have to mold yourself to the role to kind of pitch yourself to it. And you turned it completely around. That's inspiring.
I was very fortunate that the investors and the CEO really said, what do you want this role to be? Do I want to run laptops and the network, the enterprise network and the Wi-Fi? Do you want the help desk? So initially I said no to a lot of things. I wanted to be super focused on the digital platforms, but now 2 years in, I've taken more of that. I've taken infrastructure. I don't need to worry about the laptops and the service desk, but I work very closely with the IT director who looks after that stuff. We've compartmentalized kind of that piece, because it can be, and it doesn't need to change that much. And then everything else is now in my space. So very fortunate to have that. Like having been doing this job for a really long time, that sort of trust and just the trust and kind of belief that as the expert, I best know how to define the role has been incredible. Every day I think, wow, how lucky I am, and I think that they're all quite happy with how we're doing and fulfilling what I said we would do with the job. So yeah, it's been great. But I realize it is a bit of a, kind of setting an example, certainly for the directors in my team, of what they might do with their career. It's very hard, and I know we'll probably explore that a bit more, but I think it's very hard to do both, because, kind of alluding back to the point that you made earlier, you don't have like junior CPTOs. Unless you're a founder in a startup, generally most people are either doing product or they're doing an engineering manager, engineering director, and VP of engineering, CTO. So it's very hard to do both, because they're very, very different skills. I think because I started in tech in an operations role, and so understood, once upon a time I worked with Cisco routers and switches. So I'm talking the lowest level of the stack. So I understand a lot of the technology, even though I wasn't writing that much software. And that's helped me a lot. I think it's fair to say my engineering team, trust me, I do challenge them, and I challenge them in ways that I think surprises them sometimes, because of my lack of expertise in some of their areas. But a lot of it, again, is common sense around supportability, maintainability, performance, scaling, all those important things. The language itself and the tools itself matters a little less. So yeah, I think that's been easier for me than I would say most of the product people that I've met over the years. And then conversely, with the engineering leadership, very few of them, many of the CTOs and VPs of engineering I've worked with, they just don't understand the business side. They don't kind of get that we need to make these things profitable, and we need to make this can sound controversial, but we only need to make the products good enough. You don't need to gold plate them. You may not need to have sub 0.1 second loading times, bad example, but you only need it to be good enough. And if it's another 50% effort to get 1% optimization, it's not worth doing it. Those sorts of mindsets that come with a business kind of mindset isn't natural to most CTOs. So that's where the gap is. And that's why in many organizations you get conflicts between the CPO and the CTO, or the VP of engineering and the VP of product, because they're coming at it with different things that they're optimizing for. And they're not reporting to the same exec. It's all hell. And I've worked in many places where that is a massive frustration. So
you put that brilliantly. No, absolutely. And that leads to kind of the next topic. I don't want to jump there yet, but that's, what's it like being an executive in an investor-backed company, meaning that you're not the founder, but you're coming in to do something at a certain point in scale. That business side really having that sense which is often counterintuitive, right? Like you said. I remember doing diligence on a company once, and they said, well, we deployed to production 100 times a day. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's great, but what does that actually mean?
Why?
What needle is that actually moving? Maybe it is. I mean, maybe that sort of, rapid deployment is really moving something forward, but it's hard to put that on a scale unless you understand more of how that impacts, the either top line revenue or bottom line. But the thesis that I've been formulating lately, I wanted to run by you, is that I think a lot of the hard technical stuff that we had to solve maybe, 20 years ago has either been solved by better frameworks or now AI, meaning there's a lot of scaffolding. There's a lot of, stuff that just isn't a huge cognitive lift that just needs to get done. And I think that is becoming an enabler. And it also, when people think about AI replacing people, it kind of accentuates the greater need, which is being able to connect that technology to a concise problem, to be able to ask your engineering team the right questions, regardless of, whether the exact, language for a framework. Does that make sense? I mean, I feel like it just means the role is going to become more important over time.
I've always thought that to be the case. I've again, another red flag for me is someone who says, well, I remember at the BBC people were like, I'm a Perl developer. That's all I'll code in. And I'm thinking, well, you've put a pretty short time frame on your career. Engineers definitely have to move with the ever changing technologies. And that is the skill set they have is how do you solve the problems, and how do you apply the problems? Because so far it's early days, but, the AI use cases are very specific and very good at solving a thing, but our world is not made up of point solutions. It's workflows and, it's next best actions and it's human interfaces. And so you've got to join all of those things up to make an end-to-end working solution. And so the AI might be a component of that. It doesn't do everything. And I mean, I just think about we've had, I don't know, we've had all sorts of technology solutions for a long time, and yet some of the most basic stuff that we need to do in our lives still doesn't work. Like the street lights in my road were out for 3 weeks. And you just think like something so simple, I don't know, where is technology making this better? But where is technology fixing it? Someone still had to come and dig a massive hole and, so I don't think we're all going to be out of jobs because the jobs will evolve and change, but also it takes a lot of effort to change humans and to change our infrastructure and to change the way we live and we breathe and we work. I mean, I would love a house that was fully managed and maintained by technology, but all of that infrastructure that you need to unplug and replug, it's going to take us many years to all be sitting around and on a universal income and not working and enjoying the spoils of a technology driven world. I think that the key to success in that environment is just being always ready to adapt and to try something new and not be afraid of it.
Next on CTO to CTO, Jo and I talk about organizational culture, talent, and critical skills for the next generation of leaders. Let's talk a bit about the pressures, right? So let's talk about that airplane that we got to keep in the air. You know, you don't need many pilots who survive several crashes, right? So, being in such an important role, you can make some mistakes, but not many. How do you handle that, and how do you kind of build an organizational culture that on the one hand you want to give people the space to grow, but you've got some serious pressure that comes with understanding the business implications of really a lot of the decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis. So what can you share there?
I mean, I think the key is where I've seen what we're trying to do here fail is that kind of idea that digital transformation is a massive thing, but I've generally seen it done where there's a lot of investment, not a lot of return for a long period of time. And the problem is that in 12 months, your whole business and environment has changed, and you probably need to just throw away everything you've done because it's not worth it. And I know that's the kind of foundation of Agile, and we all understand what that means. But my impression is that a lot of people think when you're doing transformation, you can't do Agile because you're moving a really big monolith into something else, and that's going to take time. And I just don't believe that's true, and we've proven it where we are. It's a balancing act. It's finding quick wins along the way whilst you're doing some of the heavy lifting in parallel so that you can not keep the wolves at bay, but a bit like that. Like, that there is some major replatforming that you need to do. We always try as a leadership team to slice things as thinly as possible. What's the value we can ship as quickly as possible? But there is a few things that we're doing this year that are going to take 6 to 9 months before you get the value out the door. And I hate that. It really frustrates me because I feel while that's happening, I think something's going to change and we're going to have to throw all that away. So I'm very paranoid about it, but staying close to it and keep removing scope and keep thinning it out is really key. But for an organization, when you're doing that, you can't just do that. You've got to find other things that you can do that can deliver value as you go along. But underneath all of it, you don't do that in hacky ways that you throw away. We are doing everything whilst we're minimizing shortcuts and minimizing tech debt. And that it's just really, really difficult to do that. So there's a lot of places that you're seeing. It's like deliver value quickly, but do it in a way that's sustainable. Do it on the new stack. Make sure you have the right testing frameworks. Make sure you have, all the right infrastructure. Make sure you're thinking about security as you go. And then making sure that also you're not building a bunch of dependencies on other teams and other legacy systems. So you're just asking all those questions all the time. I think the size of the team is kind of key. I wouldn't say we have an endless checkbook. We don't. I shaped the number of teams to about the, and I don't know why. I'm sure there's some science behind it, but it's probably just experience, which has turned into my kind of guess of what it should be. I think any more than 10 or 12 teams running in parallel is too big for me to be across enough to see all the connections. And that's where I'm adding the value, is understanding that a team over there is doing something that might impact a team over here. And how do I make sure they're not pulling in opposite directions on the tech stack or the roadmap? And with a really large organization, that becomes next on impossible if everybody is not able to run independently, which we're not. We're kind of building this foundational platform in lots of parallel slices. So I think I capped the budget ask anyway, naturally, because I knew that's about all I could mentally hold in my head at one time, which sounds a bit, I don't know how my CEO, they wouldn't have given me any more money anyway. So that was a good thing. And I wanted to go as fast as we could. So.
And I think it also forces a kind of urgency and a kind of a constant questioning that, and it's thinking about, something you said earlier, sometimes, you speak to people about agile or product development, and they can kind of talk you through the typical, these are the things we do and why they're important. But I think at the end of the day, it's having a real discipline, the idea that agile is this big flexible, we're just going to throw paint at the wall, kind of, figure it out as we go is a huge misconception. You have to be very disciplined in every ceremony, and focusing on it. Yeah.
And I would argue that we're more structured than most IT projects are. We have a 3-year roadmap. What's in the roadmap gets fuzzy, but the big 3-year goals is, in my head, I want to be off certain platforms. I want to have foundational experiences in X, Y, Z domains. And we're then able to start being more innovative as we go. There's kind of a view of what I painted to the investors of where I wanted to be. And that's the big picture roadmap we're sticking to. But what we do, in what order, what problems we're solving, we work that out as we go. So we have our vision, 3-year vision, which is actually, it's a 5-7-year vision, but kind of what does that look like in 3 years? What does the roadmap roughly look like? How do we get from legacy tech to new tech on that roadmap? And then what are we going to do in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3? We roughly sort of say this is where we want to be after the end of year 1. And then how do you carve up that into 4 quarters? And then we just keep every quarter review. Obviously the agile ceremonies force that anyway, but we sort of ladder that up. So a 2-week review ladders up to a monthly review, ladders up to a quarterly review, minimizing as much meeting time as possible. But it's really, really helped us to keep everyone moving in roughly the right direction and, deprioritizing or prioritizing things differently as we go, because we're all reflecting together and staying focused on that big thing, which is very kind of structured and very rigid in many ways, but it's working. And I don't think the teams feel constrained. We do a lot of feedback and surveys, and they all feel like they're innovating. They're not, the problems they're solving are fixed, but how they're solving them is not fixed. And I think that's all they want, the freedom to be creative in solving those problems. So, yeah.
And it's kind of like, people don't think about rigidity and alignment being synonyms, but they almost are. It's that you create the alignment and people stick to it. And yes, it might seem rigid, but it's actually the most, it makes people feel successful in their jobs too, because they know they're contributing to something that is, shared across all teams.
And I think it's the job of the leadership to make sure that, the key thing to that being successful is reflecting back on the impact, so that they know this is the revenue you're driving, this is the CSAT you're driving, this is the impact you're having on these metrics. Then they can feel they are really making that difference. I've worked in organizations in the past where all I heard from, cross-functional product teams was, we don't have any autonomy. We want to, and I'm like, why do you get to decide what problems to solve? Like that's, it's the company that decides, right? So I heard that for many years. That was a big thing from product teams, is like, we don't have any autonomy to solve, to decide what we solve. And I'm like, but how is that possible? That's just not how business works. Maybe in a startup, but yeah, I tend to work in more mature companies that have lots of problems, but have a lot of customers. Then that's, for me, it's exciting, because you've got people that you can talk to, you can understand, and then you can figure out how to take technology and make those problems go away.
And aligning with that, in line with that as well, and also thinking about the chief product technology role is, I like to talk to technical teams about the business details. That's something that, in the past, maybe someone says, don't bore them with that. They don't need to know that. They need to know what to build. You need to talk to them about technology. It's not the contrary. Everyone wants to
totally
know.
Agree.
It's like you can't, you want to treat, it's like talking in a room with adults. I raise my kids so they can talk to adults, not so they just, stay at a certain level.
And things have changed. I remember 10, 15 years ago where, an engineer would, a massive generalization, but it would be hard for me to find an engineer who'd want to go and talk to a stakeholder or who would talk to an end user. And today's, the youth of today, that people are much more multi-talented. I think that engineering, at least maybe we're just lucky with our hiring, but the guys in my team, they will happily just like jump on Slack or jump on a Teams call with a stakeholder and say, like, what's the problem? And they'll come up with a solution and bring it back to the team and validate it. A product person doesn't need to go and do that. The product person's thinking about the bigger problems. They're very flexible. They're very able to go and have those conversations and feel empathy. Recently, one engineer found out that one of our people in the facilities team were having to print out these codes, and they had to print one code at a time. We have them around the buildings for people to scan in. It's how we track attendance, because we need to do that from a regulatory perspective and also health and safety for our students. But they were having to do like every single code individually. And he was like, that's mad. And it wasn't something that was flagged. It just came from a conversation with that stakeholder. And he came up with a solution in like 10 minutes. And the emails that I got from the stakeholders about how wonderful the team are. And it's just because that engineer talked to that person and listened to the problem and thought that's really easy for us to solve. So those sorts of just building that culture then revolutionizes the organization. And we've got a lot of support across our organization because they know that we really want to help them be successful, and the engineers kind of love that and feel a lot of satisfaction from it too, which is great.
Absolutely. This has been wonderful, and I really appreciate your time. This is super generous, and I think it's pretty inspiring. Anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap up? Any questions for me?
No, I'm just really pleased that you thought to ask me to chat, Lucas. I mean, we've only met a couple of times, and I'm happy to. It's always interesting. You don't often sort of reflect like this every day. So it's in these conversations you think, well, yeah, these are the things I've learned over the 25 years that I've been doing this. So it's really nice to have these opportunities. I do appreciate it, and I hope you found some of it was useful and interesting.
I think this is a ton of fun, and I'll tell you a couple of the reasons why. I mean, first is that we don't often have the chance to engage like this, right? Oftentimes we're engaging as, business partners. Someone's a customer, someone is a provider. That's usually, how all these things work, whether your customer is an investor or internal or external customer. So we don't have time to have these kind of conversations. And I feel like oftentimes the structure for this kind of engagement is a conference or a keynote. And I get tired of those things. They're fun, but there's always that level of, well, let's go have a drink at the bar and then we'll have a real conversation. Yeah. So, I know it's a bit early in the day for me, so no drinking here. But I think these are valuable because they kind of expose people to the thought process. And one thing you said that really resonated, and I'm just thinking about, one practice I try to have is, I like to have a mentor who's maybe 10 years ahead of me in my career, and then I like to mentor someone who's 10 years behind, now I won't say behind, but just 10 years younger, right? And having that kind of balance, someone who's been there to help you, move you up, and then you're also pulling someone up along the way. Absolutely. I think is a great exercise too. It's also great talking to someone really in the same generation, because when we came into the job market, there was this big, sort of gap out there. It was all this new technology, and it wasn't really clear who was qualified for it. And if you're lucky enough, you just dove right in. So, yeah. But Jo, this has been really, really wonderful. Really appreciate it. And the last thing I'll leave us with is that you're an inspiration in many ways, particularly since I have 3 daughters. I think, when the oldest hears this podcast, she's going to feel much better about her future. So whatever.
That's really kind of you to say. Thank you. It's exciting. I think they have everything to look forward to. So thanks for your time, Lucas. It's been great.
Thank you. This was it for this episode. Join us next time for more real-world conversations between technology leaders. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to CTO2CTO. See you soon.